Screencasts have a number of advantages over other methods for delivering information and for learning. And one of the significant advantages that we have observed is when we have diagrams that we need to introduce and explain. And from chemical engineering examples or things like a TXY diagram or explaining Miller indice planes in a crystal structure, a process flow diagram for a distillation tower, or the McCabe-Thiele diagrams to analyze the concentrations in the distillation tower, or pressure, volume, temperature diagram, and can make a long list here. The advantages are, one, that we can introduce the information sequentially. This is certainly one of the big advantages. For example, in a textbook where we might be looking at a double effect evaporator diagram, we would see something presented in a figure that looks like this, though certainly drawn more neatly. And so everything's given at once, and for students then they have to understand the various processes and where the flow streams are going. And there's some significant advantage instead to introduce things one at a time. For example, showing just the containers. Now we're going to sequentially introduce the flow streams. The other advantage that I'm demonstrating here is we can use color to make it clear we're talking about a liquid inside a container. And then we can proceed as we describe the process to say that we have coming into the heat exchanger steam, which condenses and then leaves as a liquid at saturation conditions. Coming into liquid is our feed, and this has some composition. We're going to evaporate some of the liquid to make a vapor, and then the concentrated solution now leaves at the other end, and by using color we can demonstrate the differences in the process. We're now going to take the vapor and use that in the second effect. So it's going to go into, again, this coil for heat exchange and condense as a liquid. And we can continue to explain this type behavior with the flow stream. So taking advantage of color gives us a significant advantage in introducing the material one step at a time and explaining what that is has a big advantage over everything at once. It also helps us to reduce cognitive overload. And what we mean by that is it can be more difficult for someone learning new material to have this kind of diagram in one place, and then on the next page the text that describes the diagram. So in a screencast there's some significant advantage to instead introduce the diagram and explain it in narration and not write down everything that I say when I am describing the diagram, because the cognitive overload of having the text and visual diagram together can make it more difficult for students to learn. One of the other advantages is that we don't have to be linear in our presentation, so we can do something and then go back and directly refer to something that we did earlier. And this is certainly much more difficult in a textbook without reproducing figures multiple times. And likewise in a textbook, one diagram is presented because if instead 23 diagrams were presented showing the sequential steps, it would take up much more room. So in a flow diagram, in, for example, a McCabe-Thiele explanation, introducing one line at a time has some significant advantage for making it easier to understand what's being presented. Of course, one of the other advantages of screencast is that they're short, and so we'll finish this screencast here to keep it short and focused on just a few aspects of screencast advantages.